Welcome
Yes.
everybody. Thank you for joining for today's webinar. My name is Sushant Agarwal and I am currently serving as a chair of IEEE Computer Society PSIT student chapter. Today we are presenting a webinar on cyber security system presented by Professor Sandeep Shukla. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please note them somewhere or use the chat box. After the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A session. And now I would request our Aparna ma'am, our counselor, and our keeper to please introduce sir and carry on with the meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Sushant. Thank you, sir. Welcome to this webinar today, all faculty members and student community. I welcome Honorable Speaker Professor Sandeep Shukla, sir, for giving us time again today. My regrets for communication glitch yesterday's evening. Thank you, sir. Thanks all the guests. Let's start with the session now.
So I'm going to talk about the cybersecurity of cyber physical systems. And normally, when we talk about cybersecurity, we think about two things. We think about our individual security because we are all using banking and other software systems, and then our phones and apps and so on. So that's an individual security that is also very important for us. But what is more important now is that we have almost everything digitalized. Like if you think about how power supply happens to our houses, how water supply happens to our houses, how rails run with railway signaling, or airplanes run with air traffic control. These are all networked, very complex software and hardware systems which communicate all the time, and therefore they are subject to various kinds of cyber attacks. And because of that, these attacks are not only going to affect us individually, but it's going to affect the entire population as a whole. And therefore, there is this idea about this nation states, other countries that are not having good relations with the country can actually launch a cyber war by attacking the infrastructure systems like power system, water treatment system, railway system, etc. And we call them critical infrastructures. And these critical infrastructures, when attacked, could be a big problem for the entire country and entire population. And therefore, we are much more worried about that than the individual security, although individual security is also very important from the individual standpoint. So, so let's look at this issue that the digital transformation that happened in the last 10 years or 15 years or so, that our economies are digitalized, our governance, our health system, our education are more digitalized. And as we see that with this current situation with lockdown and all other active situation, we are actually going to go more towards e-delivered services like e-education, for example, or e-health. So therefore, there is digitalization of that aspect as well. And then industrial and critical system operations are also digitalized, like grid, the power grid, the industry, modern industrial automation control. All these things are going to be very important for driving the economy of the country or economy of a region. And therefore, if they are attacked and they are stopped from working, then we have a lot more consequences than attacks on certain other things. And then, of course, we have these social networks, mobile phones, etc., which everybody or a very large number of people have. And therefore, those are also places where digitalization has taken place. And therefore, the more attacks are, more attackers are targeting those places. So, if you look at the space of companies that run the critical infrastructure. So By that, I mean the companies such as UPPCL, or if you think about KESCO in Kanpur, or other power companies like Power Grid Corporation of India. These are companies that run our power system. They have generators, they have transmission system, they have distribution system, and all these things are computerized, controlled with software and hardware systems, and also they communicate with control center, they communicate with end devices, and therefore there is a lot of issues. And what we call this technology as opposed to IT, which is the information technology, we call it OT, or operational technology. It is the technology that is basically computerized, but it's actually a lot more complex than the regular IT. IT normally means, for example, databases, web services, web servers, mail services. We talk about data repositories, files, and so on. But in this case, the equipments that are used to control the power system or control the railway signaling, these are very specialized equipment, specialized hardware, things like programmable logic controllers, things like remote terminal unit, things like intelligent electronic devices. These are devices that basically are measuring this power, the situation of the system, the dynamics of the system, and then controlling the dynamics of the system so that it does not go out of control. And if it goes out of control, then power will not be generated, or power generators may have accidental bursts. Transmission lines may not transmit power. The distribution lines might not distribute power to households, or railway signaling may be disrupted. So these are called operational technology. So in 2019, the SONS Institute, they actually did a survey of the top management of many of these companies, and they found that about 50%. So if we look at this numbers here, about 50% of people, like this is we have 12.6% and 8.6%, who are very aware that their company's risk. 50% of them think that the cyber risk is the biggest risk of their company, and the other 50% think that the risk is slightly less, but they also think that there is a cyber risk associated with it. And then if you look at the number of incidents that are happening around the world, in terms of cyber attacks on these kind of companies, you see that there's been a difference in over time. That there is a difference building up 2017 versus 2019, and you see that 1 to 2 attacks used to happen in about 50% companies in 2017, but now it is less. It's about 27%, whereas 3 to 5 attacks are seen by more companies in 2019. 6 to 10 attacks are seen by a large number, more than 3 times the number of companies that used to have that many attacks. And 11 to 25 attacks used to be not happening in many companies earlier. Now 6% of companies have perceived that many attacks, and more than 15 has been seen by 6.1%. So these companies, these OT systems get attacked all the time. And as we'll see, I have a few slides on how, some of the incidents. And you'll see that these incidents are growing in frequency and numbers, because now the attacks are not done by some regular hackers or regular somebody interested only in computers. You can actually buy attack exploits from the dark web. So you can actually go to dark web and actually buy exploits, and actually you know nothing about cybersecurity and can still make attacks. And also there are countries which has cyber army, like China, for example, or Russia, for example. They have the cyber army. Their job is to actually do reconnaissance, that is to check other countries' security in these particular sectors. The sectors if you attack them, they will harm the country the most. And they actually do a lot of these attacks. They don't do a very devastating attacks usually, but they're doing reconnaissance. They are trying to figure out where are the security holes and where they can actually leverage when there is a conflict between countries. So this is what we are seeing. Now, who are the attackers? So hackers, for example, are used to be the main culprits in this case. Hackers also used to have like script kiddies that kids who are just interested to explore this kind of things. And then there used to be hackers who are very socially responsible, like the anonymous, right? They used to based on certain issues, they would do some hacking and so on. But that has come down quite a bit compared to earlier to now. Right? Whereas nation states and state-sponsored actors have become one of the main attackers in most cases. And organized crime, criminal gangs also have gotten into this because, as I said, that the barrier to entry to cyber security, cyber attack has gone down substantially because there are exploits. You have to just run a few commands. You can also buy services. That is, some place in Russia, for example, if you go to the dark web and give them money and give them a target where you want to attack happen, they will do it for you, right? So attacks are going to is happening. And then there are hacktivists. Hacktivists are more like what I was saying is these more ethical hackers who are more driven by the ideology. And then competitors, that is, if company is your competitor, they might actually hack you to destabilize your business so that they can make gains. There is also former employees who are disgruntled, and then there are former providers, equipment providers, and so on, who know your system very well, what equipments you have inside your system, and they could also use that knowledge to attack your system. So initial attack vectors, if you look at the initial attack vectors, so if you have physical access to the facility where all this control system and everything is situated, then you can directly make attack by making physical access to the devices. You can also do remote access by bypassing the internet architecture, like you have firewall and you have intrusion detection system around your perimeter. But what happens is that in many cases there are vulnerabilities in the perimeter itself. So perimeter defense is breached. Then you have the trusted remote access. That is, people who have legitimate access or authentication to access your system, they can also be fooled by social engineering and other ways. So social engineering is a way by which somebody sends you a link on the phishing link on email or on Facebook chat or something. You click on the link and then you see you're already connected to your office network or your factory network. Then that can actually make attack also. Service maintenance and consulting is the time when others come and change your system. They do upgrades, they do patching of your software, firmware, etc. During that time, they can also make attacks. Similarly, supply chain. So one of the biggest problem that, and this is particularly true in India, that the hardware, software, etc. in this critical infrastructure, most of them are purchased from other countries, especially countries like China, etc., where there are also a lot of attack possibilities. They might actually put Trojan horses inside this hardware or software, and then that can actually trigger at a certain time to actually attack your system. So supply chain is one of the biggest issue in cybersecurity. And last week, the American president has given an executive order to actually change the way the US power companies buy their equipments, their transformers, their other kinds of equipments from other countries because they are very afraid of this supply chain based attacks. Now, the other thing is that this operational technology is supposed to be secure. So in the old days, operational technology used to be disconnected from the outside world. There used to be very high physical defense. There will be, like for example, if you want to go to a nuclear facility anywhere in India, you have to get special permission. You cannot just walk in, right? So similarly, the operational network, the devices that are doing the sensor measurements and control to control a nuclear power plant will not be connected to the internet. That used to be the case in the old days. But what happened in the era of machine learning and big data driven business is that the data from this factory floor or data from the actual field are very important for the business process optimization, and therefore these things are more and more connected to the from the field network, which used to be disconnected from the network, to the business network, and the business network is connected to the internet, and that gives a path to for the attackers to go into the main control network. Control network or the operational network is the most sensitive part, and that's where the attacks has to happen in order to shut down the power or create a disruption in the railway signaling, etc. So in the survey of 2019, it seems like 11.5% companies have their operational network directly connected to internet, which is very dangerous. The others, 9%, they have connected to third-party private infrastructure, like a telecommunication company giving network service. There are about 23% who use a demilitarized zone. So in the network, you can have, this is the field network, you have a demilitarized zone, and then you have the business network, and business network is connected to the internet. So there is a firewall between the field network, the OT network, and this is the DMZ or demilitarized zone, and there is a firewall between the business and this network, and then there is internet, there is a firewall facing the internet as well. But then reaching this firewall has happened. So connected through DMZ does not mean that you are totally secure, but you are more secure than if you directly connect yourself, this sensitive network to the internet. And this is 57%. This is the most common case, the one that I kind of drew. That is, the DMZ is connected to the business network, and then business network is connected to the internet. And there are still 27% of the places where they don't connect to the internet, and some others are unknown, etc. So what we are seeing here is that the most sensitive network through which this very critical operations are controlled and measurements and controls are done, they are getting more and more connected to the internet, and this phenomena is called an IP convergence, and this is a very worrisome situation where attacks are easier to make. So we see that over time, so if you look at this graph, 2016 to 19, this is the 19th graph. So the attacks on the operational system has been much higher than it used to be in 17, 18, etc. So that's the situation right now. So these are some of the critical infrastructure that has OT or operational technology. Power grid, telecommunication, transportation, oil and gas, water supply, sewage, banking and finance, emergency services, agriculture. So if you go to Ganga Barrage, you will see that there is this huge pump house. It has all kinds of equipments that are used to control the water, not only the pumping of the water, but also purification of the water, filtering, etc. All these things are controlled by special hardware and software equipments, and after that water is supplied to the city, right? So now if somebody can somehow affect those control and then make the, let's say, the chlorination process so high that there will be a huge amount of chlorine going into the water, or maybe make it so low that the water will not be purified and people will fall sick in large numbers, Those are the kind of things that can even attack a water supply system. So, so here are some of the stories. So one of the earliest stories about this is the Stuxnet. This was a worm, internet worm that was unleashed into the nuclear power plant in Iran, which was doing uranium enrichment. And this actually was one of the most sophisticated malware that was put into this network, so that it actually, what it did was it compromised Windows systems, it compromised the programmable logic controllers, and it did not destroy them. It just lowered the speed down to so that the actual uranium enrichment cannot happen. Now, what happens is in such kind of attacks is that it is an under the radar attack. It takes time for the victim to understand that it has been attacked, because nothing visible happens, like a huge destruction of an equipment or bursting of a generator or something does not happen. So this took them some time, and when they figured out, people started taking this thing very seriously, because this particular nuclear plant was not even connected to the internet. So what happened is that they were given USB sticks. The engineers were given free USB sticks in which the malware was originally given, and they connected the USB stick to their computer. And then when that happened, they actually got attacked. The worm basically got into the internal network, which was not connected to the internet, and it still happened. So then there was an attack on a German steel plant which created massive damage on the steel plant. Again, a critical infrastructure. The New York Dam was attacked with the Iranian cyber attackers in 2015. Ukraine had a power grid attack in December 2015, but they again got attacked in December 2016 for first time by a malware called Black Energy malware, second time by a ransomware. So then last year, around December, January, we saw that the DTRAC attack was in India's largest nuclear plant in South India, Kalam, and this was actually a North Korean malware. Thankfully, this apparently did not go into the OT network. It was only found in the IT network. If it went to the OT network, anything could have happened. Nuclear accident could have happened. We also saw repeated attacks on the Saudi Aramco, which is an oil and gas company. In their process, they have used a lot of computerized equipments, and that was where the attacks happened. And this is also considered probably an Iranian attack, but it's not clear. We also see a lot of malware coming in, like ransomware. You might have heard, and some of you might have fallen victim to. So if you have a ransomware attack, you basically download a ransomware by being fooled into clicking on a link, or somebody sends you an attachment with email, or send an attachment through Facebook, or maybe through WhatsApp or whatever. And as soon as it comes in, it basically starts encrypting all your files, and then tells you that unless you give money in Bitcoin, they are not going to decrypt it. And even after you pay Bitcoin, it's not necessarily that they are going to pay. They are going to decrypt it. So this is a very common phenomenon these days. A lot of people fall victim of ransomware. And then there are other kind of ransomwares like Locker Gaga, Mega Cortex. All kinds of ransomware has proliferated in last couple of years. And a lot of people are losing data, and this particularly happened in the US in a number of cases where we saw that COVID lock is a recent malware, ransomware that exploits the people's fear about coronavirus. So it gives you a link or something to read some news about coronavirus, but actually it downloads a ransomware and locks your computer. this kind of stuff. So this is something that we trained this, and if you remember, well, you might not remember 2017 in the summer, the Health and Human Services of the UK got hit by a ransomware WannaCry, and their health services, the hospitals could not work for many hours because all their files, patient files and prescription files and everything was encrypted, and so on. And in last few 2 years, there has been a lot of cases in the US and in Germany where city governments got ransomware. Their entire system got encrypted with ransomware, and some of them actually paid the hackers to actually get the ransomware decryption, and others had backups. So keeping backups and everything is very important. When if you have ransomware attack, you have to have backup which are detached from your computer, so that you take backup and you detach the drive, so that if ransomware hits your system, then at least you have a backup. Okay, so that basically paints the picture of what's happening. Now let's talk about what it is that how is this happening. So usually the critical infrastructure, it could be power system, it could be a transportation system, whatever it is, or oil refinery, etc. They are called cyber physical system. The reason why they're called cyber physical system is that they have a physical system. Right, in power system, you have the generators, which basically takes coal or gas or oil and burn, and then create steam. Steams drive the turbines, and then they do that in a magnetic field, and then the current gets induced in there, and that current is then sent over long distance by using the voltage step up and then step it down, all that stuff, right? So this is an entire physics-based process. There is no computer issue here. But if you don't control this system so that it is in the right speed, it does everything correctly, whether the governors of the generators are running properly and all that stuff, or in case of power transmission system, the voltage levels are maintained, capacitance levels are maintained, etc., then you have to use control. And this control part is done through computer, and where you need control will be decided by the measurements at the various points of the system, and that is what is called sensing. So you have sensors which tells you information about the current situation at every point of the system. That information comes to a controller, and the controller then decides what needs to be done, and it sends the instruction to what we call actuators. That basically changes the speed of the turbine, speed of the governor, or changes the capacitance bank configuration. May turn on a transformer which was earlier not turned on. All these things are done through the entire this control. And this control, so you can think of this as a physical plant, and although the picture here seems to show the physical plant is the small one, but actually the physical plant could be very, very large. For example, in a power system, like if you consider UPPCL, it has hundreds of generators, many miles of transmission lines. There are substations. When you drive in the highway, you will see substations on the roadside. All this infrastructure is part of this physical plant. And then there are sensors everywhere, right? So there are sensors that collect information from the physical plant and then send that information over the network to the control centers. And the control centers compute the current state of the system, and then using that information, it decides what change needs to be done in the various configurations. And that change is commands are sent through the network to the actuators, and then actuators do the changes. So this is the sensor actuator controller paradigm that is used for this kind of systems control. Now you see that all these sensors are not like thermometers, right? They are pretty sophisticated sensors. They are driven by microprocessors. So these sensors themselves are kind of, they have software in them. So they are kind of themselves computers. And then there are networks connecting the sensors to the various points in the physical plant. So there are protocols that are used to bring the data with sensors and so on. And same thing, the data is then eventually goes over the network, and then it goes to the control centers, and this control is computed, which is also a computer, and therefore it has software and everything. And then through the communication network, the commands go to the actuators, and the actuators then do the actual work. So you see that these things can be attacked, the sensors can be attacked, the actuators can be attacked, the network communication can be intercepted and attacked, and the controllers can be attacked. So there are attack surfaces everywhere. You have attack surface all over this cyber physical system. So we see that the attacking means are at the measurement places like sensors. There are actuation places like actuation devices, and then and the corresponding network. Computing and control will be controller, hardware, software, logic, etc. And then there are applications at the control centers that are also subject to attack. So these are places where attacks can happen. So depending on where the attacks are happen, we divide them into three different parts. One is called the disclosure resources, the resources that discloses information about the system. Disruption resources that send you information about how you can disrupt the system. And then system knowledge. System knowledge is very important to actually make these attacks very successful, because if you don't know the physical dynamics of the system that you want to attack, then your attacks will be like random things. Like you will be sending out DOS, the denial of service packets. You will be trying to intercept some information, but you don't know what to actually do in order to make, let's say, a power generator burst, or you don't know how to make a transmission line, get disconnected. To do that, you have to make sure that you have to understand the whole mathematical model of the system that is being controlled. And that is a very closely guarded secret of the companies. They don't tell you about your system topology or their parameters, etc. And therefore, you have to somehow figure that out yourself by attacking the sensors or the networks and get observation from the information that is being passed in order to actually reconstruct the system model. And that's what the system knowledge is about. And based on what you have at your disposal, if you're an attacker, you are in one of this, in this three-dimensional space. So let's look at what this space is. So in this space, if you are here, then you have no control as an attacker. You have no control on any of the sensors. You have no control on any of the actuators, and you have no system knowledge. Then you cannot make any attack. If you go along this axis, then you will see that your ability to control more and more sensors by doing cyber attack will increase. And as they increase, your capability to do various kinds of attacks will increase. Similarly, if you can compromise some of the actuators or all the actuators, if you are here, then your ability to attack will increase. And if you have zero system knowledge, then only a certain types of attacks you can make. But if you have 100% system knowledge, then you can make a really sophisticated attack. And that's what the Stuxnet attack was like a covert attack. So all this, an attacker would be in this three-dimensional space at some point. Like if he is here, for example, that means he knows he has compromised some of the sensors and he has some partial system knowledge. If he is here, for example, then he has some actuators also, right? And he has some sensors and he has some system knowledge. So this kind of gives us, the defenders, some knowledge about what what will be needed by an attacker in order to make the most sophisticated attack or less sophisticated attack, and prepare ourselves according to that knowledge. One more thing is the pathology of an attack, that is when an attacker wants to attack your system. Remember, the OT network is not usually directly connected to the real network. So sensors, actuators, controllers, they are in the OT network. So you have to somehow get there. So what you do is that you send a phishing email to one of the business managers or executives who click on the link and download the malware. And that malware then goes from copies itself from one machine to the other in the business network, and then it finds a password file for the so let's say the administrator. Then it tries to decode, sends it out to a more powerful machine under its attacker's control, where the passwords can be tried to be cracked using various kinds of rainbow attacks and dictionary attacks and so on. If it can crack the password, then it will then breach the firewall and go into the DMZ. And then it will repeat the process to go into the firewall of the DMZ to the OT network. Now, you might think that this is going to be very hard to do that, but it turns out that it's not that hard. And in fact, it has happened in Sony Entertainment System. It has happened to Target departmental store chain. It has happened in many places where such path was taken to actually compromise the entire system. So what is our philosophy about then to defend such systems? So what we believe, and many people think that if I put firewall, if I put authentication, if I have a intrusion detection system on my network, then I am safe, right? So I have done all the security job that I want. But it turns out that perimeter security is not enough. So firewalls may have misconfiguration, they have vulnerabilities. Authentication can be bypassed by various authentication bypass techniques. There will be insider threat. That is, somebody who is inside your company, and it turns out that 30% of large attacks happen because of the insiders. And oftentimes these are not insiders who are actually bad people. They get fooled. They get honey trapped. They get social engineered. They get phishing emails. So but once somebody is an insider, he doesn't have to go through firewall or bypass the authentication because he has legitimate access to the system. So this can happen through social engineering and all that. And then you have the vulnerabilities in these equipments like firewall, etc. So you must design your system to be resilient. So what is resilient system? Resilient system means that when you design a system, you have to assume that attacks will happen. So you cannot say that, oh, I have a very nice perimeter defense, so no attack can happen. That is not correct. So what you have to say, assume that attacks will happen. It's not a question of whether attack will happen, it's a question of when the attack will happen. So what you have to do is that you have to continuously do monitoring of your system and then accordingly take action. And in order to do that, what you have to do is that you have to collect information, threat intelligence about your system on a real time. And then you have to process that information to make actionable intelligence. That is what just getting data from all over the point of your entire network is not enough. You have to actually make knowledge out of that data, right? So you have to do various machine learning and other techniques to actually make that data intelligible to the security analyst. And then the security analyst then can take actions, precautionary actions, preventive actions, or post-preventive actions like post-attack actions if he has the right intelligence. And then you have to detect that an attack is ongoing very, very fast and then contain it. Containment requires that you make your system you make your system such that you can island or dissect the system as an attack happens, you figure out where it is happening, how far it has progressed, and then you disconnect that part of the network. And your system should be designed such that even if you do that, you will be surviving. Your system will survive. And that's the kind of things that we do in our work. That is how to design systems which are resilient and how to make tools and technology that will allow us to be resilient. That is tools and technology for quick detection of attack that is happening. That then very quick way of doing localization where the attacks are, doing preventive methods like figuring out if there are vulnerabilities in our system, and continuously do this and patch them, and then we figure out how to do this islanding without disturbing without destabilizing the system. So so to do all this, first thing we have to learn is that how to do penetration testing. That is how to be an attacker, like how to be in the attacker's shoes and attack your own system, not to harm it, but to figure out where the weaknesses are. So you're trying to figure out, and this is called the penetration testing, vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, or VAPT. So we see that we have been doing this all the time, and we have figured out that many of the power system equipments that are used all over the country have various kinds of problems. Like they are subject to denial of service attacks. They are subject to cross-site request forgery. They are subject to file intrusion attacks. They have the remote file intrusion. They have various kinds of the header post-header injection attacks. They have hard-coded password in them. They have control hijacking by doing protocol reverse engineering. They have we have ability to impersonate as some other device inside the network and then fool the other components of the network. So we have ability to do DLL injection. There are hard-coded APIs in the code from commercial products that we actually use in real power system, in real water treatment system in the country. All that stuff. So what I'm since I don't want to like go into the very gory details of how we have figured this out. But what I want to say is that if you are interested in doing such things, you have to learn how to do vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, or VAPT. Now, when you do VAPT, you have to know how to. First, you have to understand the equipment or the software that you are trying to probe in order to figure out if it has some weakness. But then you have to use tools that will automate the process of this testing. And there are tools like Metasploit, for example. So you can actually download Kali Linux and get a copy of Metasploit inside the Kali Linux. So Kali Linux is a free Ubuntu distribution that is used by the penetration tester. And then there are lots of documents and lots of videos on the internet where you can learn how to use the various features of the Metasploit in Kali Linux, and then you can do various kinds of penetration testing ethically on various systems. You should always be an ethical hacker rather than a black hat hacker. Ethical hackers usually, if they find the vulnerability, they will immediately tell the person whose system he has found the vulnerability in order for them to actually fix it. So that's one area that of cybersecurity that where you can easily do without having much investment. You can always install Kali Linux on a virtual machine on your whatever computer you have, and then start using it by learning some of it from the online, and then you can test various websites, you can test various kind of your home router and all kinds of stuff. You can test for their various weaknesses. The other thing is that we want to do the continuous surveillance. That is, we want to know if we have installed any system, any hardware, any firmware, any software that has vulnerability. And if it does, then whether it has patches. And if the company that created that or the open source community that created that software or whatever, they must have upgraded it. Then, if there is a discovered vulnerability. So how do you do this for when your company or your institution has thousands of machines and thousands of websites and all that stuff? You cannot do this manually by trying on each of these. So there has to be an automated process. So that's another thing that we call the C3I Guardian. C3I is the name of the lab that or the center at IIT Kanpur that we started. And the C3I Guardian is a piece of software that allows you to automate this process. That on a nightly basis, it will figure out for each device what is the set of vulnerabilities that have been newly discovered, and then it will actually give you an information in an actionable form, so that you know how to do the patching of all these things. So this is also a very simple software. You can easily do it if you want for your system. It's not very difficult to do. Then, so then we have the threat intelligence console, or assigned as the software security incident and event management console, or SIEM console. So there we actually collect information. So we install agents on all the devices, and then with these agents collect information from all these devices, and then send that information to a server. Server then analyzes that information and then do analytics on that information and represent it to the security analyst. What it does is that it actually can give the security analyst a global view of what's happening in the system. Are there attempts to log in to that particular device? Are there unauthorized access to that device? Are there any kind of sudden performance degradation on that device? Are there any kind of changes in the files on the device, especially system files? All that information can be obtained at the server, and then the server can do analytics and also the present information to the security analyst, and then they can take action. So this is some of our threat intelligence, and this is also totally based on open source software. You can do a smaller version of this for your, let's say, your lab or something. It's not very difficult. For example, you can have a open source one called Waza, W-A-Z-U-H. You can download that, and you can actually try this by putting Waza agents at various devices and having a Waza server that will collect all this information, this kind of stuff. So I'm going to skip all this because I basically told you the essence of what this is. So this is our secure inventory management system. That through which we actually, as I described before, that we actually figure out which devices have vulnerabilities and where to find their patches and provide all that information. So these are the screens of that software that we have created. Another thing that we do very often is figuring out who is attacking our system and how they're attacking our system. And this is a technology called deception technology, by which we actually create a system that attracts attackers. That is, it's called a honeypot, like as if you have put some honey to attract insects, and the insects will then actually come and get stuck in the honey. This is the same kind of idea. So the honeypots basically are way. So you can create honeypot mimicking a web server. You can create a honeypot mimicking an FTP server. You can create a honeypot mimicking an SSH server. You can create a honeypot mimicking a programmable logic controller. So, or you can even create a honey net. That is, you create a fake network that looks like a network, but it's actually not the network on which you are doing your own system. What this does is that it gives you a good idea about who are trying to attack, what are their modus operandi, what kind of malware they bring into the system in order to launch them on your system. So this honeypot technology is also not very difficult. You can actually try to create a SSH honeypot. There are a lot of open source ones that you can start with and then add features to it. So these honeypots are another thing that is not that difficult to do. So I'll show you some quick results about the honeypots that we have created here. And so these statistics are, I'll show you some interesting statistics. Like the SSH honeypot, we found that interestingly, about 4% are from China, but about 47% attacks were from Vietnam. Now that does not look right? So Vietnam is a much smaller country, although they are very good in cyber security and all that. But why would they attack a particular organization inside India in such large number? So our now IP addresses can be faked, as you know, right? So the way we decipher the location of the source of the attack is by looking at the IP address and looking at the geolocation of that IP address. So, but suppose somebody compromises machines inside Vietnam from outside Vietnam by putting what we call bots or botnets, and then use them to launch attacks to us. We'll think that they're from Vietnam, right? So that's the kind of thing that we observe here. These are how many attempts by login. So this is not very interesting. We captured a lot of malware using this honeypot. So if this is a sort of like a representation of how many of them were like botnets, how many were Trojans, some of them were banking Trojans. So attackers came into our system and downloaded this malware. So it seems like attackers were trying to then propagate that malware to the rest of our system, but they couldn't because our honeypot was not allowing them. And then after a while, they got tired and they left. Now, we also figured out how many of these attacks were actually automated and how many of the attacks actually humans sitting at the terminal by looking at the inter-event times. And we found that, let's say in SSH attacks, we found that about half and half were actually human beings, probably sitting at a terminal and trying all this, and then double that is actually about scripted attacks, that is automated. This is an attack, total number of attacks on another honeypot. And this is another thing that we noticed is that when we float a honeypot, we put it on the network. Initially, the attacks increase, and then it slowly peters out. And then if we change the honeypot by putting it in a different IP address, again we see similar patterns. So what it says to us is that the hacker community also talks to each other, and they very soon the word gets out that this IP address is not really a good not a good source of any kind of information. So people stop going there. So then there is botnets. Your network might be actually affected by botnets. And there are various kinds of botnets like P2P botnets, there are peer-to-peer botnets, there are command and control based botnets, and centralized botnets. So detecting botnets from the network traffic that you see on your network is another interesting problem. And this is also another problem that requires very good knowledge of how to use machine learning libraries, and you need to collect the data from your network. But other than that, it's not that difficult. So you can actually also take up a project where you actually create a mirrored port mirroring on the main router of your institute, and then get all the let's say for a month you collect all the traffic, although it will require you a lot of disk space, and then you will use that traffic to analyze behavior of the traffic inside that is coming and going out and in from your institute, and try to figure out if there is a bottleneck element inside your institute or not. And for that, you have to understand how the botnets work, what is their pattern of communication with their command and control server, this kind of stuff. So you can actually do something like that. We have done this, and there's a paper that these are features. If you want to do machine learning, you have to have feature set. So you have to figure out what features you should look at per host, and then figure out using that, can you determine whether something is a botnet or something is a regular communication, doing regular internet communication like anybody else. So I will not go into details. Now, finally, many of you have traveled to IIT Kanpur to see our labs. We have created a industry level replica of a power generator. We have both thermal generator and solar generator on outside. We actually have power synchronization system, which is completely an automated system. We have power distribution system, which is also automation driven, and then power transmission system. We also have water treatment plant. It is a full-fledged water treatment plant, industrial scale. We have industrial automation test bed. So you need, in order to do research in the domain of critical infrastructure cybersecurity, you need similar test beds, because you have to actually work with real system, but nobody will let a real power company will never say that, okay, you can come and experiment on our real power system. You always need to do it on the test bed, prove your concept, then maybe you can use that in a real system. So we have a very extensive test bed. Many of you, I think, saw it like a couple of months ago. But those who haven't seen, you can visit our website. Our website is actually our website is this one, security.cse.iitk.ac.in. So let me conclude now. So there are a lot of other efforts that we do, which I didn't talk about, like we do some hardware cryptography, we do network coprocessor design for IPsec. We do a lot of work on blockchains and anomaly detection for physical dynamics. These are the kind of stuff. So there is a lot of stuff. If you visit our website and look at the publication list and so on, you'll get some idea about what are the different things that have been we have been doing. But what we want to say is that we are engaging in research and development of methodologies, techniques, and tools for protecting critical infrastructure, industrial control critical infrastructure. We need test beds to do this work, but there are things that you can do without test beds, like as I mentioned, that you can create various tools. You can do penetration testing without, not of the critical infrastructure, but of regular computers, regular web servers, regular mail servers, and all that stuff. You can also we also need threat intelligence in order to do effective this thing, protection, which includes like creating honeypots, collecting malware, being able to do classification, analysis, etc. And what we want to do is that most of the tools in security are currently from foreign countries. This gives us a huge supply chain problem. So one of our major goals is to create indigenous tools so that we are not dependent on the foreign supply chain. And finally, one of our goals is to create more awareness, training, and capacity building, because eventually, we need, about 1 million cybersecurity professionals in the country, and we have probably 5,000. So we need really have to create a lot more people interested in cybersecurity, study cybersecurity, get expertise in cybersecurity, and then we can have a real workforce, especially in protecting our critical infrastructure. So with that, I'll finish. It's been an hour.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. If you permit, we would like to take some questions of the participants.
Sure.
So one student wants to ask the question. So Rutvik, you can ask your question.
Yes, actually, I follow you on LinkedIn, and I pursue my research work in software-defined networking.
Okay.
So I want to ask you that how SDN can be helpful to protect the cyber physical systems in industries.
Yeah, very good question. So actually, if you look at the when I was talking about creating resilient system, and I was talking about being able to segment the system such that you can actually take out the part that has been affected and let the rest of the system work. The SDN is the right kind of networking paradigm that in which you can do such things. So I think that's where SDN will be very good fit for doing this. Of course, in today's critical infrastructure, one of the problem in critical infrastructure changes would happen. The changes only happen over time. So today we have legacy network, and so if you tell them tomorrow that there will be a SDN-based better your system can be reconfigured completely within seconds by if you use SDN, so that it can protect itself. They will not be implemented for many years. So that's the problem. But yeah, I mean, conceptually, you can use SDN for creating resilient systems.
Okay, sir. So one more student wants to ask the question. I will unmute him.
Hello. Sir, good afternoon. I will ask how the cyber security is correlate with the blockchain and how it will be provide the concern with cyber security network.
Okay. Good question. So blockchain uses cryptography heavily, but cryptography is a one enabler of cybersecurity. Cryptography is actually about hiding information, proving the authenticity of a person and so on. So blockchain uses that, right? But blockchain by itself does not give security. It uses hash to actually keep the integrity of the data. All that stuff is important, but it doesn't give you security per se. Security and in today's blockchain, like beyond like if you look at Ethereum or other blockchains where we have smart contract, many of the security attacks are because the smart contracts are bugs, security bugs. So therefore, oftentimes people think that the blockchain means that security is assured. It's actually not assured at all by the blockchain. But blockchain is being a very nice way of keeping data that cannot be later on changed because it is immutable.
Yes.
So therefore, many times, so we have done a work called Verity, where we actually keep the database logs in the blockchain. So therefore, as an database administrator, if he wants to unethically change some data, let's say student's grade, then we cannot detect that unless there is a way to check the logs of the database. But the logs of the database, if it's a system administrator, can also delete the part of the log, right? So therefore, we needed a way to actually keep the data log in such a way so that it cannot be randomly changed, and then we use blockchain to keep the log. So some such applications of using blockchain in providing security makes it is possible. There are also proposals to create DNS on blockchain or public key crypto infrastructure on blockchain. This kind of stuff. So blockchain is more like a way to keep data in such a way so that the record is not easy to expunge. It's actually almost very computationally or some other way very expensive to change the data, and therefore anytime you want to keep integrity of data, you use blockchain is a good thing to use. And then if the integrity of data is important to ensuring security, then blockchain is very useful. So that's the way I look at it.
Okay, so sir, one more question.
Hello. Yeah, good afternoon, sir. This is Arpit from PSIT. Sir, my question is related to the Zoom app. That the Zoom was like, it was like the government came up with a guideline that you should be careful while using Zoom app. So I want to understand about like when we are using Zoom for our educational purposes, how safe it is, and like what are the concerns related to that?
Okay, so I have a whole deck of slides on that. But so Zoom had really some problems in its Apple version of the app, where it was using the Facebook SDK for Facebook-based login, which was leaking information to Facebook. Not very important information, but the location, etc. So therefore, but they have now gotten rid of the Facebook-based login, and that SDK has been removed. So that was one problem. Second problem was that in Apple also their pre-installer was actually installing Zoom, and that pre-installer is supposed to only check the configuration of the system and then ask the user for whether they want to install Zoom, but it was not doing that. That has been fixed. There was another issue with the Zoom chat. In that Zoom chat, if you put a URL, then it was linking it. So people were actually using a file URI, like file:// etc. And then that was making a attempt to connect through SMB protocol. If you have SMB protocol on your system, and for doing that, it was actually sending out your TLM password hash, and that was leaking your hash of your password. But that has been fixed. Now, if you write an URL on the chat window of Zoom, you will not be seeing a hyperlink. They have disabled that. So that has been fixed. So all the problems that was on the client side has been fixed. At least known problems that were reported have been fixed since then. So if you have the latest version of Zoom app, you have any of those problems that will affect your computer. Now, there is a concern that was raised that Zoom actually claimed to be doing end-to-end encryption. And end-to-end encryption means that when I am talking to you, our conversation is completely encrypted and going to you. But when I'm talking to, let's say, the Suraj, that is a separate encryption between me and Suraj, right? So every pair has a different encryption so that we cannot see each other's conversation. But what Zoom is doing is that it is doing an encryption between me, the speaker, and the Zoom server, and then it is unencrypting it, and then it is re-encrypting to send it to you, right? So therefore, the Zoom server is actually able to see what we are talking or what we are sharing, etc. So that is not an end-to-end encryption. Now, that raises an issue that if you are, let's say you are government and you are discussing important defense strategies, you cannot use Zoom there because Zoom server will have all that information. Now, you might say that, Zoom has so many conversations going on in a day, they will not look at your information. But if somebody knows at the Zoom head of data center that there is a specific conversation happened for the defense ministry of some country, then they might actually look at that. And bigger question is that Zoom data center maybe in China or in US or wherever, so that government can actually force them to hand over everything, and that will include that particular information. So if you are discussing something like a government business, or if you are discussing something like let's say your company secret and all that stuff, then you should not use Zoom. But then you cannot use almost anything because nobody is doing end-to-end encryption except WebEx. But WebEx will do end-to-end encryption only for a specific version, for the corporate version. Other versions don't have because once you do end-to-end encryption, recording, for example, cannot be done. So, because recording currently is done at the Zoom server. Now, if Zoom server cannot read what conversation is going on, then it cannot record it, right? So, therefore, the whole end-to-end encryption will create this lot of limitations. So, any system on which you are not doing end-to-end encryption, you have all these advantages at the server side. So for your classes or high school classes or something, you are not discussing anything that is so confidential that even if Zoom server knows what you are discussing, will be a problem. So in that sense, there is no issue as far as I am concerned. I am having all my things on Zoom because I am not discussing any. Now, if I have a meeting with the government, I will probably not use that. Zoom, but anything else, if you're doing anything normal, Zoom is fine. So that's my analysis.
Sir, so can we take more questions or?
Yeah, we can take another 3-4 questions.
Okay, sir. So.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I am in first year of BTech and I want to pursue my career in cybersecurity field. So, what should be my first step in this?
Well, you have to take either a lot of courses, or you have to do self-teaching, right? So nowadays, taking courses are not that difficult because even if your institute doesn't have an appropriate course, you can take courses on edX. You can take courses on Coursera, and you can take courses on NPTEL. So there are a lot of courses. So you start with a course at your leisure time. If the institute doesn't have a course on one of these platforms, let's say Introduction to Cybersecurity kind of course, then you see what is involved and what you need to do further. Then you actually take maybe a course in cryptography. Then you will get to know how the cryptography works. Again, then you start taking other advanced courses. And then after that, the internet has lots of materials like, if you want to do penetration testing, there are a lot of materials, a lot of videos, if you want to do, malware analysis, lots of videos. So all these things are available, but you need to start with some basic foundation, and for that you probably need a couple of courses on the on NPTEL or edX, wherever it is available. So I would suggest that.
Okay, sir. So 2 more questions we will take.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, this is Abhishek Shukla from PSIT. Sir, I was going through a workshop on a cloud computing, and it was discussed that we might have get an AI-based attack. So how this type of attacks can be handled in such environment, cloud computing environment?
Right. So AI-based attack can happen in many places. So right now, if you hear about any kind of attack, it is done by a human thinking about how he can exploit things, and it usually takes it's just not one thing, right? He puts together a number of things he has to do in order to do this attack. So AI, I haven't seen this actually in reality, but there has been a lot of talk about AI synthesizing the steps of an attack, right? So you tell the AI what is your goal, you want to do this, and then AI should synthesize the steps. So this is a far in the future, but the whether the attack is AI based or not, it will be based on exploiting vulnerability, right?
Yes.
So first you have to see that you don't have vulnerabilities, or you patch your vulnerabilities as soon as possible. But you can still get attacked by new vulnerabilities that is not known, and for that you did not know how to fix it. But the other thing is to actually, as I said, that you have to assume that attacks will happen, and you have to actually prepare to detect that an attack is happening by looking at the symptoms, and then you have to accordingly disconnect that part of the system which has already been compromised. And that's a tall order, but that is something that we are aiming at, so that you cannot really protect yourself from attacks as such, but when the attack happens, you can survive. And then once the attack has been isolated and detected and isolated, then you can start to become from survival mode to recovery mode. So that has to happen. Now, this AI-based attack, I don't think that will be, at least in the beginning, will not be more severe than the most brilliant hackers that can conjure up. So AI-based attacks will be more templated, so it will be initially not very intelligent, as intelligent as the best hackers, but eventually maybe that can happen. But that's a long time to go.
So it's a vulnerability based.
Any attack has to exploit some vulnerability. It may be a software vulnerability, it may be your perimeter vulnerability, it may be your human vulnerability, like a person getting socially engineered. It can be a vulnerability in the hardware. So there has to be a vulnerability to do an attack, right? Otherwise, either it has to be a vulnerability, or it has to be a really poorly secured system, like you don't have a firewall. Or you have a firewall, but your rules permit almost everything. So those kind of things. So that's I would say is a vulnerability itself.
Okay, sir. So one more last question we have.
Hello.
Hello, sir. This is Navneesh.
Yeah.
Sir, how using a SSH turning, we can access our computer remotely, but directly we cannot. But sir, what does that third parties that we use do to our computer? Is that safe?
Yeah, so let me understand your question. So you're saying that using SSH you can access your computer, but you cannot access otherwise.
Yes, sir. So we need to use apps that give us the remote access, like Remoted. Sir, are these apps safe to use? Well, what does these apps do to our computer to get the remote access?
No, so I'm not sure what you are talking about, because if you want to SSH to your computer, you have to have a username and password on the computer, or you have to have a cryptographic key to access that computer. So you are saying that there are apps which can bypass those things?
Yes, sir. Like Remoted, we can remotely access our computer by using these apps.
Like a remote desktop, or what are you talking about?
Yes, sir. Remote desktop.
Oh yeah. So if you go to Microsoft Security Advisory web page, you will see a huge number of fixes that you have to do on remote desktop. RDP protocol is one of the most dangerous protocols of Microsoft. So I never do RDP from home or anything. because I actually have disabled RDP on my machine. So I would suggest that now your machine might not have a very important confidential information. In that case, you can say, oh well, even if it does get attacked, I have backup of everything, which is detached from my computer. So I would rather take convenience over security. But for other people, maybe if they have important information on their computer, they might prioritize security over convenience. So you can, so security is never absolute, right? So you have to decide based on, what the trade-off. Like obviously, securing very tightly would require means that there are a lot of inconvenience, and that inconvenience, there is a trade-off between inconvenience and security, performance and security. So you have to decide. But normally, I wouldn't like to do that. But you have to decide based on your risk assessment of the information on your computer. If it gets hacked, will that badly affect your finances or anything? Then you should not do it. If it does, if it doesn't, then you can do it. That's something you have to decide.
Okay, sir. Sir, one last question from my side. That recently some security issues have been raised regarding Arogya Setu app.
Yes.
So, would you tell us that like what actual issues are there which have been raised recently?
Yeah. So the issue that was raised is that the app does not have adequate protection from being used in a rooted phone. And using that, once it is used in a rooted phone, then it is allowing people to make HTTP request to the server by arbitrarily changing the longitude and latitude or the radius of the information, and then using that information, so you can download, how many are set in one this longitude and latitude within so many meters. And using that information multiple times for a neighborhood, you can actually go and you can probably pinpoint to a particular house. And that will mean that you will be able to say who is attacked, who is sick. Now, in a developed country like US, that will be an extreme breach of privacy, because if somebody has a particular disease, the government may want to know that, but that doesn't mean that everybody else in the world should know that. Actually, it's a violation of the HIPAA laws in the US. But in India, like people are journalists are going after people who are having this disease and all that stuff. So everybody gets everybody's privacy is breached by everybody, like neighbors, the journalists, and all that stuff. So for that, it probably is not such a big deal that somebody can figure out which house has a corona positive guy or not. But in an international standard, that will be a breach of privacy.
Okay, sir. So now I would like to invite Aparna ma'am to give a vote of thanks to sir. Hello, ma'am. Can you hear us?
Thank you, sir. Yes, definitely. Thank you, Surya. Thank you, sir. It was very nice to hear your strong inputs about DTRAC malware attack on India's largest nuclear power plant, initial attack vectors, operation technology connected to internet, and generic model of cyber physical systems and all. Really, it was very informative. I belong to physics department, so it was completely new for me. But I just have heard about all the terms. But today, I think I have learned a lot of things from you. So really, it was a very fantastic session. So I wholeheartedly thanks to you, sir, for enlightening us on recent trends.
Yeah.